A sweet victory for Golden from KPop Demon Hunters offers K-pop its first ever Grammy Award, while Sugar here in South Korea looks ahead to a bitter taxation. With more on Press Perspective today. Hello, you're watching Press Perspective for this Wednesday, February 4th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Today we talk about K-pop's moment of glory at this year's Grammy Awards and then move on to prospects of a bitter tax on all things sweet here on the national front. For this, I have writer Colin Marshall with us in the studio. Colin, welcome back.
Glad to be here, Sunhee.
I also have our Marianna Baroli with Italian weekly news magazine Panorama live on the line. Marianna, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Hi, Sunny. Thank you so much.
Right, Colin, let us start here in the studio. So let's begin with news of the song Golden from KPop Demon Hunters winning a Grammy Award to offer K-pop its first ever Grammy victory. What are the broader implications of this nod of acknowledgement, if you will?
Yes, this is being taken as a victory for K-pop at the Grammys. In some sense, a long-awaited victory. For some, anyway. There are many observers, especially in Korea, or in the K-pop fan community worldwide, who have been saying for a long time, for years, complaining, when will K-pop get its acknowledgement? When will K-pop win a Grammy? When will K-pop artists start winning Grammys? Which is an implication, or it's a premise worth thinking about, because you do wonder. The Grammys are an American awards ceremony. Most of the artists who win have been American, as you would expect, or American adjacent, at least from the English-speaking world. So I do wonder where the idea came from that it was almost the inevitable destiny of K-pop artists, of Korean pop music artists, to win Grammys. It's a little like, if you think about Korean music awards, they're not lavishing awards on American bands. You don't see Maroon 5 getting Korean music awards, Korean industry awards, no matter how popular they may be here. So I do wonder about the premises there, but in any case, it doesn't surprise me to see Golden winning this award and it being taken as a Korean victory. Though, I mean, as we mentioned on this broadcast, KPop Demon Hunters, the film, the most successful in Netflix history, I believe, is thoroughly an American production. Writer, director, there are Korean Americans aplenty in this production, but it's an American production, a Hollywood movie, we can say. And same with the music. For the most part, the performers, the writers, and the producers, with the exception of, I think, one producer, are either Americans or Korean Americans. And so you could say, well, in a sense, it stands to reason that this song would win a Grammy because it's an American song. There are Korean lyrics, and we'll talk about that later in the show, but it is, I suppose, maybe a hybrid of K-pop and American pop music, a bit like another song which was in the running, Apatu by Rosé, the K-pop star, who is from New Zealand, incidentally, and Bruno Mars, the American pop star. That did not win a Grammy, but it was also seen as one way that K-pop could make its mark, or at least sort of crack open the door in the Grammys. Now, another sort of conversation this opens up is to what extent K-pop is now a genre unto itself, as opposed to simply a label for Korean pop music. Because not all Korean pop music perhaps would be recognized as K-pop stylistically, but at the same time, maybe K-pop can be made by non-Koreans. Maybe a group that contains no ethnic Koreans could make recognizably K-pop. You know, it could happen. But as of now, I think we're seeing more so than the victory of K-pop per se, we're maybe seeing an emergence of a new kind of K-pop, or a change in the definition of K-pop.
Right. Marianna, Golden's Grammy was covered widely by the foreign media. What appears to be the common narrative, would you say?
I think the common narrative is pretty clear right now, and this is being framed like a point of no return, especially in Italy, because foreign media aren't just calling this a very historic first for K-pop, but they're reading Golden as proof that K-pop has actually fully crossed from global popularity into institutional legitimacy. So Grammys matters, especially I think abroad, because they're very conservative design. It's a show that it's very slow to move and it's deeply industry centric when it comes to music. So when they finally acknowledge K-pop, it's not about like chasing a trend, but about recognizing a shift that I think it's already happened everywhere in the world. But at the same time, I think there's a shared collective memory in the coverage of Grammys. You know, everyone remembers disappointment around BTS being passed over multiple times. And I think that also this year, it could have been a Rosé here, but because let's be honest, APT was basically everywhere. But the context doesn't take away from the win of Golden. I think it actually gives more recognition and more weight to it because it highlights how K-pop changed, as Colin said, and how it's been shaping the global pop culture. So without formal recognition and why this moment feels earned rather than accidental. So I think Golden isn't just, it's a breakthrough, you know, that arrives in a hybrid models through animation and the recognizing of fandom culture and streaming logic and the global songwriting. So this is not K-pop, but like we usually know it, but it's like knocking on the door in a new forbidden door.
And with regard to this year's Grammy Awards then, Marianna, how would you care to assess the presence of K-pop this time around?
I think the presence felt less about volume because there weren't that many nominations actually, but the performance of Rosé was great, and obviously the position mattered more than visibility. So the win of Golden sent a very clear message that K-pop doesn't need to dominate the stage to be relevant, and that it's actually shaping the global music and entertainment history. So I think what really stood up was that K-pop appeared like a very broader cultural and industrial ecosystem rather than a single genre competing for trophies. So, you know, K-pop has basically everything: storytelling, visual world, animation, transmedia, fandoms, everything function, and it's highly sophisticated, and the community is always part of it. So I think it's a very mature phase of the global influence of K-pop, and I think it's only the beginning. So I think that this year Grammys marked a very high shift on the spectrum of vocal to structure, and K-pop wasn't there to seek validation anymore or proving that it belongs to the American or the foreign countries, but that it's a point of innovation that it's highly recognized from everyone.
Right. And moving forward, Colin, the New York Times, it claims that K-pop Demon Hunters has actually gotten a greater number of Americans to learn the Korean language. What do you say?
Well, I say that I suppose I'm glad because it makes me think back to my memories of first learning Korean myself, and that was in the mid-2000s. I started just self-studying for a while there because I had no other resources. I was living in Santa Barbara, California, a medium-sized city, got into Korean film, and from there just sort of found what I could to study with and applied to a Korean class that happened to appear at a local community college and was then canceled because of lack of enrollment. I think I might have been the only one who signed up. And that's impossible to imagine today when, from what I understand it, Korean classes are so packed in American, not just community colleges, but universities and cultural centers that you can't get into one. You have to wait. I mean, it's hard to get into because there are too many people now, not too few. So complete reversal from how it was 15, 20 years ago. At the same time, you know, I can see some echoes as well of my experience. I moved to Los Angeles after a few years so I could live in Koreatown, where I practiced Korean more. And there's a Korean cultural center, of course, not far from Koreatown. And I signed up for classes there, you know, very excited, and found that the beginners class was full, always full, in the biggest room in the center. And it was full to bursting, almost standing room only. Everybody there was there almost because of K-pop or K-dramas. Again, this is about 2010. Already, that was the case. In Los Angeles, a very Korean-aware part of the US, maybe the most. But that was how the lowest tier, the beginner class was. But as you moved up the levels, the numbers dropped precipitously. And I started in the class, like level C or whatever it was, with maybe 10 people. So you go from 50, 60 people in one room down to 10, and then past that point, it narrows down even more. So this is something referred to in this New York Times article about Americans learning Korean because of K-pop Demon Hunters, that the attrition rate is very high. So as I often say, I started learning by learning Hangul, the Korean alphabet, which is well known to be easy. Even I knew that somehow before I even got an interest in Korean. I knew the alphabet was easy to learn. So I picked that up, and then it gives you the impression that the rest of the language might also be easy, when that could hardly be further from the truth. And I think many students still find that, or for other reasons, they come to Korea and they come up against some other difficulty, not necessarily related to the language. But I have seen many statistics that say every language in America, every foreign language, is losing students but Korean. So that's a victory right there, I suppose, culturally speaking. And if that translates to more Americans learning Korean before they come to live in Korea, I'll be happy about that. So far, I think the level of expat language skill is still very low. So maybe another K-pop Demon Hunters can sort of give that a nudge. We'll see.
Fingers crossed for that.
Indeed.
And Marianna, is there a greater interest in learning Korean there in Italy? And also, Marianna, what do you believe is the role of culture in language learning?
I think that culture has always been the most powerful gateway to languages because, emotion beats obligation every time, So you don't really need to learn a language because you have to, but you learn it because you want to understand it, even if it's a lyric, an interview, a joke, a live stream moment, a meme, whatever. So I actually started studying Korean myself, and the very first question was from my classmate was like, when we do start understanding song just by listening to them. And I remember feeling exactly the same way, as a teenager when I started learning English through, Backstreet Boys, for example. That moment when the lyrics stopped being like, just a noise, a different like kind of words or something that suddenly they make sense. That moment is very addictive, and it's when you start feeling that you're part of the culture in a deeper and more meaningful way. So the change in Italy, I think it's very real. Interesting, Korean isn't an episode anymore. It's something that it's very structural. So universities, private courses, and apps, everything has adapted, to a demand that I think it's here to stay, and it's shaping how we're living today. It's not uncommon, to see people around the city eating, I don't know, a kimbap, or like asking for like, oh, let's go to a Korean restaurant, or like, oh, I know the skincare, like, what's your routine? So Korean is no longer seen as a difficult language, and it's also very, very deep inside the cultural skill and the cultural structure, even in our ecosystem. So I think it's amazing.
Right. Marianna, I like the phrase that you use. There's a rhyme, right? Emotion beats obligation with regard to language learning. Colin, let's now move on to another story. There is talk about a possible tax on sugar here in South Korea. Do give us some context.
Yes, this is part of a recommendation from the World Health Organization that governments tax more heavily, especially beverages with sugar. Sweetened beverages being one of the main sources of the obesity problem in the United States, a country famous for the weight of its public. The U.S. having recently pulled out, by the way, of the WHO, so maybe that won't happen there, but will it happen here? Perhaps. And I think Lee Jae-myung, the president, when he was posting to social media about this, he did mention not just beverages, but sweetened foods in general might be subject, or people support it, that people, when polled in Korea, support a tax. I think 70% of the respondents support a tax or increased taxation on sweetened foods with sugar added, with sweeteners added. Okay, that makes me think of, well, it puts my mind back to Koreatown, where I mentioned living when I was studying Korean at first, because in Koreatown you had this phenomenon, as you get in many enclaves, where the immigrants who populate it, they preserve, if inadvertently, the culture of the place they came from the era they left it. And so that's most charming to Koreans, I suspect, who visit Koreatown in the food. The food in Koreatown is still, as people tell me, it's still the flavors of the 70s, 80s, 90s in Korea, unchanged, which means they have changed here. And even in the time I've been living in Korea, these past 10 years, you can tell it's getting sweeter. The foods keep getting sweeter, not just the snacks, not just the Dubai chondugi cookies, which are probably the sweetest thing you could get right now, but even just Korean food, regular food you would go out to eat. It seems to be getting sweeter and sweeter over the years, or has been over the decades, to the point where the flavor of the ingredients seems to be somewhat obscured by how sweet it's become. So if there is a policy that can help with that, I would certainly be grateful for it. I do worry a bit about sort of paternalistic overreach in taxing sugar, taxing sugary foods. You can always choose not to eat them, and maybe it is desirable to tax something sugary, to tax sugary beverages, and use that money, as the president mentioned, to fund public health programs. Okay, fair enough, but you are conceding a certain degree of power over your choices to the state, and you might like that in this case with this president. You might not like the next president, but they'll have that power. That's the thing. So it's all well and good to sort of gain the assistance of the state in achieving your health goals, but the power will stay with the state, and the state is a sledgehammer. Sometimes a sledgehammer is a tool you need, but it's very hard once you use a sledgehammer to unsledgehammer something. So I would be wary about using tools of that kind for problems of that scale.
Right, something to think about, of course. Marianna, but for the sake of some comparison, do tell us a bit about the implementation of a sugar tax in other countries, perhaps over in Italy as well.
Italy actually postponed that until 2027. So if we look globally, I think that still sugar taxes tend to follow the same basic logically. So, they're basically less about shaming the consumers and more like pushing the markets to, let's say, evolve. For example, I'd like to mention the UK. I think it's one of the best case example. It's a tiered system that encourages companies to reformulate the products before even consumer can feel the impact of that. And also Mexico, I think, showed that the sugar tax can work, even if in the face of a very strong industry resistance, and it does influence the consumption over time. But I think the most important case is like South Africa, where the focus on sugar content shows again nudges between brands and innovation rather than simply passing on the costs. So the common takeaways, I think, from international cases is that, like, when designed properly, the sugar taxes just don't reduce the sugar intake, but reshape the way that sugar products are being sold. And it's one of the biggest change happening right now. And it's happening, I think, mostly behind the scene because most of the consumers doesn't even know that. And it's mostly based on product development and not just on, the checkout or what it feels like. So I think it's important to see how it evolves globally. And I'm very curious to see how Italy will assess to it because we're waiting for the tax. It should have been started in 2020, but it was being postponed multiple times. So we'll see in a couple of years, next year, or maybe let's see what happens.
Right. Meanwhile, here in South Korea, prospects of a sugar tax, like you mentioned, Colin, were raised by President Lee Jae-myung on his social media platform. What are your thoughts on this manner of direct communication with members of the media by the head of a country? Indeed, members of the media and everybody else who happens to be on these social media platforms, and he's become quite a prolific user of them, Lee Jae-myung. The volume of posts has gone way up, and I would maybe be a little nervous if I were on his communications team, although he hasn't shown the impulsiveness in his communication on social media of some world leaders I could name. But you do wonder how much these posts are being workshopped in advance and how much he's just sort of firing them off while being driven from appointment to appointment, maybe a little of both. But he has said, I believe, that it's a form of agenda setting, and that's a term I remember from my college political science major days, that presidents have power, of course, but they don't have as much power as often they're assumed to. One of the main
powers they do have is setting the agenda. If they talk about something publicly, be it in a press conference, social media, wherever, it does become a subject in the discourse, in the public discourse. Here we are talking about it right now because he has been making his posts about it. Now, I do worry a little bit. I know that this is part of his brand. Lee Jae-myung's brand is a president who is bringing in real democracy, which has been a sort of theme with past presidents as well. But he's the one communicating with the people. The people aren't getting listened to. He's the one who's going to give them an ear, and he'll act on their requests. Well, fair enough. Although I do worry about how to put it, a political figure being a little too swayed by what I would call public sentiment in South Korea, which can be, how to put it, about as intellectually grounded as the Dubai Chondugi cookie craze. I mean, it's important to have a sort of barrier or mediating force between the public and the decision makers, for there to be a process. And I'm not saying that Lee Jae-myung is taking his orders straight from the public, but at the same time, he's certainly building his image on the idea that, you say it, I'll do it. So we'll see what he does. We'll see how he uses the feedback he gets on social media, but I don't think he's going to stop using it anytime soon.
Right. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this edition. Colin, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Marianna over in Italy, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you very much, Sunny.
Right. That ends this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching. We return same time tomorrow, that is Thursday, with more panel discussion.